The sun rose over the Bay of Naples on the morning of August 24th, 79 AD, spreading golden light across terracotta rooftops and warming the smooth stone streets of Pompeii in exactly the way it did every summer morning. Seabirds called from the harbor. Smoke rose from bakery ovens. The smell of fresh bread drifted through the narrow streets before most families had opened their shutters. A city of perhaps 11,000 people was waking up. Farmers were already in their vineyards, checking the grape harvest that would soon need gathering. Fishermen were returning to the docks with the night's catch, their boats low in the water. Slaves began filling amphorae at the fountains that stood at major street corners, the water flowing from Mount Vesuvius itself through the city's remarkable aqueduct system. Dogs trotted along the stepping stone crossings. Children chased each other between the raised sidewalks. Two men argued cheerfully outside a thermopolium, one of Pompeii's fast food counters, its stone surface pitted with circular holes holding ceramic jars of warm food. The argument was about the price of chickpeas. It was the most ordinary argument in the world. And above all of it, above the voices and the smoke and the smell of the sea, the great gray-green slope of Vesuvius rose into the blue morning sky, quiet and enormous and utterly unremarkable. The mountain watched silently over everything. By the second hour of daylight, Pompeii's morning markets were fully alive. The Forum, the great open square at the city's commercial heart, surrounded by colonnaded buildings that housed administrative offices, temples, and covered markets filled with merchants who had been setting up their stalls since before dawn. Sellers of pottery arranged their wares on portable wooden frames. Vendors of dried fish called out prices to passing women who held wicker baskets and evaluated the goods with practiced eyes. A cloth merchant unrolled bolts of dyed fabric, vivid reds and yellows that caught the morning light, while his apprentice swept the stone pavement in front of their shop. At the bakery on the Via dell'Abbondanza, the largest commercial street that cut across the city from east to west, the baker Modestus was already hours into his working day. His cylindrical stone mill, powered by a donkey walking in patient circles, had ground the flour before sunrise. The dough had risen in the warm bakehouse. Now the circular loaves, pre-scored into 8 sections for easy breaking, were emerging from the domed oven, their crusts perfectly golden, their smell extraordinary. He slid them onto the wooden counter with practiced speed. On the street outside, children played between the tall stepping stones that pedestrians used to cross roads flooded by rain or the regular washing of street surfaces. One child stumbled as the ground gave a brief, low vibration beneath his feet.
At the dawn of AD 79, the sun rises over Pompeii. Its golden light reveals a thriving city with bustling markets and grand temples, all under the peaceful gaze of Mount Vesuvius.
It had always been there, its broad shoulders filling the northern horizon, its slopes green with vineyards and scattered villas that wealthy Romans maintained as summer retreats from the heat of the city. The volcanic soil on those slopes was extraordinarily fertile, richer than almost any agricultural land in the region, and the wines produced from Vesuvius's vineyards were considered among the finest in Italy. Pompeii's walls were painted with advertisements for local wines. Amphorae filled with Vesuvian vintage had traveled as far as Gaul and Spain. The mountain was not a threat, it was a gift. What no one in Pompeii understood, what no written record
The fire is ready for the bread.
appears to have preserved.
These figs look perfect today.
Come
on, let's race to the fountain.
Good morning, Baker.
Good morning, children. Fresh bread soon.
Be careful running, dears.
Around
What a beautiful morning.
had been so distant in time that it lay entirely beyond human memory or written record. The Romans had no concept of volcanic eruptions as such. The word volcano did not yet exist. There was no framework for understanding what Vesuvius truly was. The earthquakes that had become increasingly frequent over the previous years and months were attributed to the god Neptune, who was thought to cause ground movement. They were uncomfortable and sometimes damaging, but not understood as warnings. The ground shook again beneath the city's stones, harder this time, and a few amphorae rattled on their shelves.
Fresh figs and pomegranates, best in the market.
They look wonderful. How much for the pomegranates?
Cinnamon from the east, saffron for your feasts. I'll take some of that red powder. An excellent choice. That will be 5 denarii.
I'll take 3, please.
Displayed
Of course,
painted
here you
garden
are.
rooms whose mythological frescoes were so detailed and vivid that modern visitors to the site centuries later would stand before them in genuine astonishment. Room after room offered frescoed walls in deep Pompeian red, depicting garden scenes with birds and fountains, theatrical masks, and elaborate architectural vistas that made modest rooms feel palatial. The city's public baths, the Stabian baths, the Central baths, the Forum baths, offered citizens hot rooms, warm rooms, cold plunges, exercise yards, and the social gathering that Roman bathing culture made as important as hygiene. The theater quarter contained both a large covered theater and a smaller, more intimate Odeon for musical performances and poetry recitals. Temples to Apollo, Jupiter, Venus, and Isis gave the city's spiritual life both the official state religion and the Eastern mystery cults that were spreading throughout Roman society during this period. Gardens inside private houses, some of quite modest size, were laid out with clipped hedges, decorated with marble fountains, and planted with roses, lilies, and fruit trees. Everything about Pompeii communicated a city at ease with its own prosperity, comfortable in the beauty it had accumulated across centuries. In the stables near the Vesuvius Gate, animals were beginning to behave strangely. The bakery of Modestus on the Via dell'Abbondanza was one of perhaps 30 such establishments operating in Pompeii, serving a population that largely lacked kitchen facilities sufficient for bread making and depended on commercial bakeries for this daily staple. The establishment occupied a substantial property. The mill room, where donkeys turned the paired stone mills visible today in the ruins, the kneading and preparation room, the large wood-fired oven whose domed brick structure distributed heat with remarkable evenness, and a shop counter facing the street where finished loaves were sold directly to customers. By mid-morning, several batches of bread had already been sold, the early loaves to the servants and slaves who came before the household woke, the later ones to the morning's first wave of customers making their domestic arrangements for the day. Another batch was in the oven. The baker had orders to fill. A tavern owner wanted additional loaves before the lunchtime crowd arrived, and a wealthy household had requested a specific shaped loaf for a dinner party that evening. The donkey turned its circular path around the mill with the resigned patience of an animal long accustomed to this exact routine. The oven was hot, the flour smelled of grain and summer. The loaves browning inside it would be pulled out golden and perfect and carefully arranged for sale. But no customer would ever collect those particular loaves.
Acque sulis calidae sunt. Domine, visne plus acque. Ita vero, gratias. Pompeii balnea optima sunt.
Down by the Marine Gate and the Harbor District, the commercial life of Pompeii continued with the energy of a city whose prosperity depended significantly on trade. Pompeii served not only its own population, but functioned as a commercial hub for the broader Campanian region, the fertile agricultural territory stretching around the Bay of Naples, with goods moving in and out through its port facilities and along the road networks connecting it to Naples, Herculaneum, and ultimately Rome itself. The morning had brought visitors from nearby towns, some arriving by road with carts of agricultural goods, others landing from small coastal vessels with cargoes of fish sauce, Spanish olive oil, and African grain. The businessman Caecilius Jucundus, one of Pompeii's prominent bankers and merchants, whose family archive of wax tablets recording loans and business transactions.
Come on! You'll fall today! Not while I stand!
Later,
Die, coward!
was conducting morning business in his
Blood
office
for the
near
arena!
port, reviewing accounts.
Victory! Hail the
merchant from
therefore!
Herculaneum, 7 miles to the northwest, was negotiating the price of a consignment of wool at a warehouse near the city wall. A wine merchant was loading sealed amphorae onto a cart bound for the harbor. Everything was transactional, purposeful, utterly normal. Outside, in the streets, the quality of light had shifted almost imperceptibly, taking on a faint yellowish cast that no one paused to notice. The sky directly above Vesuvius had changed its color. The warnings had been accumulating for longer than most people recognized. The earthquake of 62 AD, 17 years before, had caused significant damage to Pompeii, its aftermath still visible in buildings that had been partially rebuilt or showed repaired walls. Since then, smaller tremors had become more frequent, their intervals shortening across the months and weeks of 79 AD in ways that only careful, systematic observation might have revealed. The springs that supplied several of Pompeii's secondary water sources had become unreliable in recent weeks, their flow diminishing in ways that puzzled the city's water administrators. The sulfurous smell that sometimes drifted through the lower parts of the city was attributed to various natural causes that the Roman scientific tradition, sophisticated in many respects, provided no accurate framework for interpreting. Animals were a different matter. Dogs had been unsettled for days, their behavior distracted and anxious in ways their owners noticed without fully understanding. Birds that normally roosted on the city walls and temple rooftops had largely departed in the days before the eruption, their absence unremarked upon amid the noise and busyness of daily life. On the morning of August 24th, the tremors intensified, no longer the barely perceptible ground vibrations that citizens had grown accustomed to, but definite, rolling shocks that made water ripple in cisterns and caused hanging lamps to swing on their chains. People began looking north toward the mountain. And then, around midday, the mountain erupted. It began with a sound like nothing anyone in Pompeii had ever heard.
The
deep, concussive boom that many witnesses later described as feeling more than hearing. A physical impact that struck the chest and vibrated through the bones. Those who were outdoors and looking toward Vesuvius saw something that the historian Pliny the Younger, observing from across the bay at Museum, would later describe in his famous letters to the historian Tacitus. A column of material shooting upward from the mountain's summit with terrifying speed, rising higher and higher until it reached the upper atmosphere where it spread outward and downward in a shape that Pliny compared to a Mediterranean pine tree. A massive vertical trunk of dark material flaring at the top into a spreading canopy of ash and debris. Within minutes, this column had reached an estimated height of 20 to 30 kilometers above the mountain, so high that its top was visible from distances of hundreds of miles in every direction. The scale of what was happening above them was simply outside the reference of anyone watching. Nothing in Roman experience, religious tradition, or natural philosophy had prepared Pompeii's citizens for what they were seeing. Some fell to their knees and prayed. Some ran. Most stood and stared at the impossible spectacle above them, trying to organize what they were seeing into something comprehensible. A strange, warm silence fell briefly over the city between the mountain's convulsions. Then the first ash began falling. The ash came down at first like a gentle, strange snowfall, lightweight pumice fragments and fine gray particles drifting from the enormous column overhead, settling on hair and clothing and the warm stone surfaces of Pompeii's streets. It was not immediately dangerous. People held out their hands and watched the gray-white material accumulate on their palms, looking up at the darkening sky with expressions that witnesses on the opposite shore of the bay, observing from safety, would later describe as a mixture of confusion and terror. The forum emptied rapidly, merchants abandoning their stalls, vendors leaving goods unattended. The baths emptied, the streets filled. People crowded doorways, looking up, arguing about what to do. Leave now, while the roads were still passable? Wait and see whether the eruption subsided? Seek shelter inside a solidly built structure? No one had encountered anything like this before, and the range of responses reflected the complete absence of any experienced guidance. The more decisive had already begun gathering family members and valuables, heading toward the city gates. The more cautious waited, watching, hoping. The pumice was accumulating now on flat surfaces, window ledges, the rims of street fountains, the tops of walls. At a rate of roughly 15 to 20 centimeters per hour, a pace slow enough to seem manageable, but fast enough to be alarming to anyone
it's
doing
getting
the
closer.
calculation.
The air is thick
And
with
the sky
it.
above the ash cloud was darkening
what's
toward
happening?
an unnatural darkness
Cover the goods,
that had nothing
hurry!
to do with the hour.
The ash is everywhere!
Darkness was arriving in daylight. The roads out of Pompeii became crowded with extraordinary speed. The Herculaneum Gate, the Nuceria Gate, the Stabian Gate, the Marine Gate, all four major exits from the walled city drew streams of people pushing outward, some on foot, carrying bundles of clothing and boxes of valuables, some on carts pulled by horses or donkeys that were increasingly difficult to control as the falling ash and the continuing ground vibrations agitated the animals beyond normal management. The pumice layer on the road surface was already several centimeters deep, making footing uncertain, and the ash in the air was dense enough to require covering the face with cloth to breathe comfortably. People stumbled and helped each other up. A woman carrying an infant dropped her bag of coins and did not stop to retrieve them. An old man sat down on a doorstep and refused to go further, and his family stood around him arguing about what to do. The wealthy had advantaged the poor lacked. Horses ready at their stables, carts preloaded with essential items, slaves carrying heavy burdens, country estates outside the city where they could head. Those without these advantages were on foot with whatever they could carry. Along the Marine Gate Road, pushing toward the harbor, a crowd had formed around a family whose cart had lost a wheel and blocked the narrow passage, while behind them the press of people grew denser with every minute. Escape was becoming more difficult with each hour that passed. By mid-afternoon, Pompeii was a city in genuine crisis, though the worst was still to come. The pumice accumulation on rooftops had reached a depth that lighter, older structures could not support, and the sounds of tile cracking and roof timbers giving way began adding to the eruption's own roaring as buildings began partially collapsing under the weight. Those who had sheltered in upper rooms found their situations becoming precarious as the ceilings above them groaned and in some cases simply gave way. The streets were dangerous in different ways. The accumulated pumice made footing treacherous. Visibility was severely limited by airborne ash, and the occasional large projectile hurled from the volcano could travel enormous distances before landing without warning. Pliny the Elder, the famous Roman naturalist who had commanded the fleet at Museum and sailed toward the disaster to investigate and to rescue people, died on the beach at Stabiae during this period. Overcome by the sulfurous fumes and ash, his body found after the eruption by rescue parties. People who had waited too long to leave now found the roads so heavily laden with ash and so congested with other desperate travelers that escape on foot had become nightmarishly difficult. Some turned back toward houses they had left, seeking the shelter of stone walls. Some kept walking, heads down against the ash fall, measuring progress in agonizing meters. Some had already given up, pulling cushions over their heads against the falling debris and praying. The worst was genuinely yet to come. As the eruption continued through the afternoon and into the evening, Pompeii was enveloped in a darkness that was total and profoundly disorienting. The ash cloud overhead had completely blocked the sun, and the absence of natural light created a blackness that was qualitatively different from ordinary night. There was no moon, no stars, no gradation of dark toward dawn to provide psychological orientation. Pliny the Younger, watching from Museum across the bay, recorded that the darkness was more complete and profound than any he had experienced in buildings with the lights extinguished. In Pompeii, people navigated by oil lamps and torches that cast small, inadequate circles of orange light through air thick with ash particles, illuminating scenes of extraordinary chaos. Some families had found refuge in strong-walled rooms, piling furniture against doors to keep out the pumice filling the streets outside, their oil lamps burning while they waited and listened. The sounds were constant: the low roaring of the volcano, the crackling of roofs under ash weight, the occasional crash of structural collapse, the wind that came and went unpredictably, and occasionally, heartbreakingly, the cries of people somewhere in the darkness calling names that no one answered. The temperature had risen perceptibly. The air was increasingly difficult to breathe without covering the face completely. And then, in the deep hours before dawn, something changed above the mountain that would bring the city's suffering to a sudden and absolute end. A deadly surge was approaching. Scientists studying the eruption of Vesuvius in 79 AD have identified at least 6 distinct pyroclastic density currents, surges of superheated gas, ash, and volcanic debris traveling at speeds of up to 300 kilometers per hour that descended from the volcano during the eruption's later stages. The fourth surge, in the early hours of August 25th, reached Pompeii, A pyroclastic surge does not look like anything that provides warning time. It moves faster than any living thing can run, faster than any vehicle available in the ancient world could travel, faster than the human eye can track its approach until it is already there. The thermal energy it carries is lethal at temperatures ranging from 300 to perhaps 800 degrees Celsius. Everyone still alive in Pompeii when the surge arrived died within seconds. The Roman soldiers found in the guard post at the city gate, apparently still at their posts, died at their stations. The families sheltering in back rooms of stone houses died there, their bodies preserved in the postures of their final moments. The people who had almost reached the marine gate and the harbor died on the road, some with valuables still in their hands. The baker's loaves were still in the oven. The gladiators' helmets were still on their hooks in the barrack storeroom. A perfectly prepared meal, eggs, fish bones, nuts, was still on a table in a house near the theater. The surge passed through the city in moments. Then silence followed, absolute and complete. In the hours and days following the pyroclastic surge that ended life in Pompeii, the continued eruption of Vesuvius buried the city beneath a compacted layer of volcanic material reaching depths of 4 to 6 meters across most of the site. The walls of buildings remained largely intact beneath this protective covering. The surge itself had been relatively thin, its lethal quality deriving from heat and speed rather than crushing weight. Roofs that had already collapsed under pumice weight created voids that volcanic ash then filled precisely, preserving the shapes of the spaces within. Organic materials, food, wood, cloth, rope, leather, were carbonized rather than destroyed in many cases, their forms preserved even as their substance was transformed. The bodies of those who died in the surge left voids in the ash that hardened around them, the soft tissue eventually decomposing while the cavity remained intact in the compressed volcanic layer. These voids, discovered by excavators in the 19th century, could be filled with liquid plaster to reveal the exact postures and expressions of Pompeii's last moments. A discovery so powerful that seeing the resulting casts remains one of the most emotionally affecting experiences modern visitors to the site encounter. Above the buried city, the landscape was utterly transformed. The harbor had partially disappeared beneath new land created by volcanic deposits. The Sarno River had changed its course. The topography that Pompeii's residents had known throughout their lives no longer existed in recognizable form. Centuries began their patient passage. Pompeii did not vanish from memory completely in the immediate aftermath. Survivors and their descendants knew roughly where the buried city lay, and early Roman emperors made reference to the disaster. But within a generation or two, as the volcanic landscape slowly revegetated and new agricultural communities established themselves on the rich new soil that the eruption had created, the precise location of Pompeii beneath the surface became uncertain. The ancient settlement of Civita developed gradually over the general area, its inhabitants occasionally finding fragments of old walls or artifacts when digging foundations, without understanding what lay beneath them in any systematic way. Medieval and Renaissance travelers to the region passed over Pompeii's buried streets without knowing it. Maps of the area showed no indication of a buried Roman city of any significance. The name Pompeii survived in medieval place name records in forms scholars can trace, but without connection to the buried archaeological reality. Nature completed its patient reclamation. Vineyards grew, olive groves spread, wildflowers bloomed across the surface of what had once been one of the Bay of Naples' most prosperous cities. The city lay in complete silence beneath the earth's renewed surface, its streets undisturbed, its painted walls waiting in darkness, its ovens still holding bread that no one had collected. Then in 1748, a farmer's spade struck something harder than soil. Someone had uncovered the first clues. The systematic rediscovery of Pompeii began in 1748 under the sponsorship of King Charles III of the Two Sicilies, whose court archaeologist Roque Joaquin de Alcubierre began excavations that revealed paved streets, painted walls, and intact buildings in states of preservation that astonished every scholar who encountered them. Previous excavations had revealed Herculaneum, the smaller city also buried by the eruption, But Pompeii's scale and the accessibility of its ruins made it immediately clear that something extraordinary lay beneath the volcanic covering. Word spread through European intellectual circles with remarkable speed. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe visited and was profoundly affected, describing Pompeii as one of the greatest disasters that ever befell the world, yet one that had given future generations so much pleasure. The writer's instinct grasped immediately what the archaeologist's trowel was revealing, not merely ruins, but a direct window into a vanished world. As excavation methods gradually improved across the 18th and 19th centuries, moving from the treasure-hunting approach of the earliest digs, which stripped objects from their context, toward increasingly scientific documentation of complete architectural and archaeological contexts, the picture of Pompeii that emerged became progressively richer and more astonishing. Streets were cleared. Building after building revealed painted walls of extraordinary quality, mosaic floors of breathtaking craftsmanship, household objects arranged as if their owners had simply stepped out for a moment. The discoveries were becoming genuinely extraordinary. What emerged from beneath the volcanic ash of Pompeii over the course of excavations spanning nearly 3 centuries was not simply an ancient city's architectural shell, but the most complete material record of Roman daily life that exists anywhere in the world. The bakery of Modestus yielded 81 carbonized loaves of bread, each bearing the maker's stamp as required by Roman bread regulations, sitting in the stone oven where they had been placed on the morning of August 24, 79 AD. The fulleries, the workshops where wool cloth was cleaned and finished using human urine, carefully collected in ceramic pots, placed at street corners for public contribution, preserved their stone vats, their wooden frames for stretching cloth, and even some of the textile materials themselves. The thermopolia, Pompeii's fast food establishments, revealed their stone counters with circular holes still holding the ceramic storage jars, some with traces of food residue that modern food scientists have analyzed to identify the specific dishes being prepared. Election notices painted on building facades revealed the political life of a Roman municipality in remarkable detail. Individual candidates' names, their qualifications, their supporters, sometimes accompanied by satirical counter-notices from political opponents. Personal graffiti scratched or painted on walls across the city, recorded poetry quotations, gladiatorial fan commentary, declarations of love, crude humor, and the 1,000 small inscriptions that people leave on surfaces when they want to mark their presence. The people were beginning to tell their stories. Modern archaeology at Pompeii has moved far beyond the excavation techniques of the site's early discoverers, applying scientific methods that extract information invisible to earlier generations. Ground-penetrating radar surveys have mapped unexcavated portions of the site without disturbing them, revealing the outlines of buildings still buried beneath undisturbed ash. DNA analysis of skeletal remains has identified genetic relationships between individuals found near each other, confirming or complicating earlier assumptions about family groups. Stable isotope analysis of teeth and bones has revealed where individuals grew up, whether in Pompeii itself or in regions far from Italy, providing evidence of the city's cosmopolitan immigrant population. The ongoing Great Pompeii Project, launched with substantial Italian government funding in 2012, has addressed structural conservation of previously excavated areas while conducting new excavations in previously untouched sections of the city. A remarkable recent find, a ceremonial room in a large suburban villa, revealed extraordinarily well-preserved black background frescoes depicting mythological scenes of unusual subject matter, their quality sufficient to place them among the finest Roman wall paintings ever discovered. Digital reconstruction tools now allow scholars to virtually reassemble collapsed mosaics, identify the paint colors that have faded from stone surfaces through spectral imaging, and experience the city's spaces in 3 dimensions as they appeared on that last morning. One final walk through the reconstructed city remained. It is early morning in Pompeii, and the city is alive. The stone-paved streets are already beginning to fill as the first hour of daylight deepens into the second. A wagon loaded with amphorae of local wine rumbles past on its iron-rimmed wheels, the driver calling to pedestrians to make way, the sound of the wheels clattering off the tightly packed facades of the buildings on both sides. The Via dell'Abbondanza stretches ahead, its raised sidewalks clean, its stepping stones crossing the street at intervals, its shop fronts displaying painted signs advertising their trades, a hammer for the metalworker, a goat for the dairy, a column of numbers for the banker. Through an open doorway, a courtyard garden is visible, a small marble fountain at its center, roses just past their summer peak, the splash of water audible from the street. The smell of baking bread mixes with the smell of sea air coming from the harbor district to the south. At the Forum, the morning market is fully established, voices calling prices and offers across the stone expanse, the colonnades casting their long, early shadows. A woman in a yellow dress holds up a ceramic oil lamp to examine its quality, her face intent with the seriousness of an important purchase. Two men shake hands on a concluded negotiation and call for wine to seal it. Somewhere behind the basilica, a musician is practicing on a double flute, the sound drifting over the rooftops into the morning air. The mountain is beautiful. The sky is blue and completely clear. Everything is exactly as it should be. A final reflection awaited. Pompeii did not simply disappear. It was preserved. That distinction matters more than almost anything else one can say about the city, because preservation, the freezing of an ordinary moment in extraordinary completeness, is what transforms Pompeii from simply another Roman city that was destroyed into something genuinely unique in the archaeological record of human civilization. Every other Roman city of comparable scale exists as a palimpsest, its stones reused across centuries of later building, its surfaces worn and altered, its artifacts scattered, and its contexts destroyed by the continuous human occupation that usually characterizes successful urban sites. Pompeii alone offers the ordinary morning. The bread in the oven, the pot on the stove, the dinner set on the table, the ring dropped in a corner and never retrieved, the election slogan still fresh on the painted wall, the mosaic floor worn smooth in the exact pattern that foot traffic created over generations. Behind every doorway of the excavated city lies not simply stone and ash, but the specific, irreplaceable evidence of how specific people arranged their lives on a specific day. The gladiator's helmet hanging on its hook was last touched by a gladiator's hands. The painted garden on the villa wall was last seen by the eyes of the family who commissioned it. The bread in Modestus's oven was last placed there by his hands on the morning he thought would be another ordinary day in a long life of ordinary days. Nearly 2,000 years later, their city still speaks, and we are still listening.